Welcome to the Radical Intimacies podcast series by Memefest. I'm Oliver Vodeb, a sociologist looking closely at design and communication, co-founder of Memefest, and editor and curator of the Radical Intimacies, Designing Non-Extractive Relationalities book. In this podcast, I will be in conversation with the authors who contributed to the book, many of whom I've known for years as collaborators and friends. The book was published in 2023 by independent academic publisher Intellect. The book explores resistance to capitalist domination through design, focusing on dialogue, power, land, interventions, and radical praxis. It presents the concept of radical intimacies, a relational way of designing that fosters closeness and decolonizes knowledge and the public sphere. In this series, we'll dive into these ideas, discussing and expanding them, and creating spaces for deep, meaningful exchange in the undercurrents. Let's see what happens. Hello and welcome to our next podcast in the Radical Intimacies series. This time I will be in conversation with Keely Macarow, who has contributed a beautiful chapter to our Radical Intimacies book titled Viral Love. Keely is an Australian artist, and in this particular piece she was interested in looking at love and intimacy in exceptional social conditions. Particularly, she was interested to look at love and intimacy in conditions of a pandemic, in conditions of our most recent pandemic, the COVID pandemic, but also Keely was interested in the HIV pandemic. So this, of course, opens a lot of questions. How can we practice love? How can we practice intimacy if we are living in more extreme, unusual, very, very restricted conditions? What are the forces that are restricting the conditions that are restricting our practicing of love and intimacy? What other forms of love and intimacy perhaps can emerge? I think it's also fair to say and important to say that there is, of course, as with our whole lives, the fact that we live in a capitalist system, there is a regulation, there's a governance, there's a manipulation, there's an extraction that is happening in relation to intimacy and love. And of course, pandemics, which show, I think, the unique pathologies of our societies, then also imply that there is a particular logic of enforcement when it comes to our practicing of intimacy and love in such conditions. Keely Macarow is an academic at the School of Art at RMIT University. She collaborates with artists, designers, social scientists, health researchers, and activists to explore how creative interventions can be applied in housing, urban, and healthcare settings. Her exhibitions, publications, events, and performances have been presented in Australia, the United Kingdom, the United States, and Europe. I personally really enjoyed the conversation, and I loved also reading the text. An artist perspective. Keely also is focusing on some artistic practices from other artists, how they have been dealing with intimacy and love in particular rather special conditions. You are very warmly invited to listen to this podcast, and as always, I also would like to invite you to read the original chapter. These conversations are conversations, and a chapter is a particular thing to read. And of course, if you like what we're doing, follow our podcast. Enjoy this conversation. See you soon. It's nice to see you. It's nice, I'm looking forward to our conversation. I was rereading your chapter several times since we last spoke. And I would like to start with this. I would like to read, what you put at the start of the chapter, namely a piece of a little poem.
Okay.
Which goes, "The kiss I give his mouth is passed onto his mouth, and his mouth then returns it to mine to bloom." And then you start your text like this: "We ache for viral love. Love that emerges from our cells and overwhelms us. Love that grows into fleshy organisms. We yearn for love that overtakes our fingers, heart, mouth, and hands, and is reciprocated and shared by another. Socially transmitted viral love." I hope I read this right. There was one difficult word for me, but
reciprocated. It's okay. I trip up over words and terms and phrases and cliches and everything all the time.
Yeah. So you go with the title "Viral Love," and you start with you have a very poetic start of the chapter, and you speak about viral love. Where does the idea for the viral love come from? Why is it viral?
Well, I was exploring the effects, the conditions, discourse around two viruses in this chapter, both in terms of the SARS COVID-19, coronavirus 19, going back to the sort of more official descriptor, and also in terms of the human immune deficiency virus, HIV. So, and both there's so many things around the lived experience of HIV and COVID, which is very much around, like any virus, is about the body and intimacy.
Yes.
But there are also have been a lot of terrible misunderstandings, taboo, and stigma around both conditions as well. And so, I mean, it had a lot to do with you, actually. Your book was called Radical Intimacies, and I remember sort of reading the call and being very interested in it, but I couldn't get my head around it in some ways. Yeah. But I knew that I was really keen to write for it and to also write about HIV and COVID.
Yeah.
So viral love is really about intimacy in the times of viruses, which is really pertinent, obviously, particularly in terms of HIV, but also obviously in terms of COVID for some different reasons. Yes. So hence viral love. It sort of sounded good. I like the sound of it as well.
I like the sound of it very much. And we should probably say for our listeners that our conversation around this chapter started in difficult times, in viral times. It was the time of the COVID pandemic.
Well, we are still in. It hasn't been said it's not. We're still in a COVID pandemic, and I want to actually read out, because I did some quick research. Right. So according to the World Health Organization, reported in May 2025, there have been 777,751,597 cases of COVID to date. Now, and in the last 7 days, 5,037 cases reported. People aren't reporting COVID like they used to. There was a lot of COVID reporting, obviously, on all the apps and everything in the first couple of years and during lockdowns, and it really hasn't been reported in the same way, which means probably there's a whole lot more, many thousands, but it's still a huge number.
Yes.
It's mind-boggling how many people have had COVID. So it's still ongoing. We're just not in lockdown conditions, and because of the vaccinations,
Yeah.
that we have had over, many of us have had over time, there hasn't been as many deaths in recent years compared to the first couple of years of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So I
What you
just wanted
say?
to give
Yeah.
some context,
Of
sort
course.
of like, I think sometimes numbers are really, really important just to grasp what is actually going on.
Yeah. It's interesting because in the, even in my my understanding before we had our last conversation a week ago, COVID was kind of over, but then you start thinking about it and it's not. As you say, it's here. It's just that we are not officially in a state of emergency anymore, at least not in certain parts of the world, right?
Well, that's right. So COVID, the virus keeps mutating.
Yeah.
And so, of course, it could mutate, it may or may not mutate into something even more virulent.
Yes.
We don't know. Like I'm not a medical researcher,
Yeah.
but there, it seems unusual with some viruses to last as long as they have, as in terms of coronavirus, to last as long as this. So, especially in terms of sort of pandemics. So I guess that's highly unusual. But also, the world seemed to only be able to last for a certain amount of time in lockdown conditions, in
Yeah.
conditions where we were really, really trying hard not to catch COVID or give it
Yes.
to someone else.
Yes. There is a, one of the things that you are saying in your chapter, and I really loved rereading, really loved rereading your work. You contextualize the pandemic and love and viral love and intimacy, um, in a global system of power and capitalism and politics and finance, and you explain how intimacy in that relation gets somehow regulated based on these interests and these forces. And it seems like the pandemic is over because, okay, the vaccine is one thing, but the normalization of the economy is, the urge to do that, uh, which was maybe the biggest motivation. But then again, only the privileged seem to escape pandemics. And you also say, well, my thought was, um, what I thought when we were living in the pandemic, especially here in Melbourne, which was, fairly special because of the length of the lockdown, and observing the world and different countries, different societies. The interesting thing to me was that as much as a virus shows what's wrong with our body, like, the immune system, that there's something deficient if the virus is successful, it shows similarly in our social body, in the society, what's wrong. It kind of highlights, certain things. And you point towards that, I think, as well, saying where some people are better off than the others, right? In such a state of a pandemic, and this shows something that's hidden when there's no pandemic.
Mm, yeah.
So it highlights things.
Well, it does, but it's known about. We know that some people in our communities are exploited more than others, and
Yeah.
some people do the exploiting. We know that some people go to work really sick because they're on casual pay
Yes.
and they can't afford not to go to work sick.
Yes.
We know that, there's precarity with people's employment. We
Yes.
know that there's racism in our society, that
Yes.
there's gender divisions, there's a whole lot of things. And it was said by many that this was illuminated through COVID-19, through the lockdowns. But those things were already known. It's just it was more obvious,
Yeah.
I think, to everyone, and maybe
Yeah.
more keenly felt because I think it even showed across people's own little communities, whether in families or sort of like neighborhoods or whatever. And maybe if you live in if your family's really wealthy and you live in a gated community, right, that's a community in itself. But then if in that gated community you may have hired help, that you're paying casually or whatever, and they're going to still have to come to work with you and go on public transport and that sort of thing. And so, yes, I mean, I did mention that, but I also want to preface our discussion now by saying that was already known about, and is still known about now.
Yeah. I guess maybe then, my point would be that certain things become more visible, or visible to more people, to a broader society.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
Which is, I guess, an important element, and also it's a state of exception, right? It's not a normal state when pandemics hit, and then there's restrictions.
No, of course not. Thankfully not. Although, it depends what community you're in. Like, if you're in DRC Congo and there's Ebola going around, your community that you live in may actually really sort of be hit by that, and the fear will be something really incredible.
Yes.
Similarly, in terms of there's large numbers of people who have HIV in a whole lot of different countries, and particularly across the African continent. So that's something different to perhaps other countries which have been more fortunate in terms of, well, look at Australia, we get a whole lot of benefits through our pharmaceutical benefits scheme, where so much of the medicine that we're fortunate enough to get at reduced prices. Not so in a lot of other countries. So people with the virus, HIV, whatever, may have discounted medicines that they're more able to get than in some other countries.
Yeah.
So.
To me, I see what you're saying. To me, what was also interesting is how different societies reacted, and and ours here in Victoria and Australia reacted in a particular way, and so did others.
Yeah.
That, I think, is part of this response as well. That it shows how societies have different bodies, and they're different, and they react differently, and they are different, and they have different pathologies.
Yeah, well, that's right. And there's still a lot of dialogue in the community about the lockdowns that we went in, and a lot of anger as well from people who are in disagreement, or who are in disagreement now in terms of what happened.
Yeah, how it was treated, right? And then of course there's also the physical effect of the pandemic on the mental health or the brain.
Well, that's right, but there's physical effect on people who got sick with COVID. If we hadn't had the lockdowns, we would have had really large death toll like a lot of other countries around the world before vaccinations became more prevalent, and thankfully reduced the amount of deaths that were taking place. I mean, there are horrible stories that we were all hearing from friends and relatives in different places around the world.
Yes. Your text, you were writing it in this particular time, and putting love at the center of your thinking and your investigation, especially about some artists' practice, that you wrote in the text. I know that you've been interested, in the past in some of the work that was related to HIV.
Yeah.
But is then the connection to love something new, or have you been doing this in the past already?
I think perhaps perhaps there's a certain amount of love for me to do something like that. In terms of the research I did about HIV, my PhD research many years ago was about creative responses to HIV, AIDS, and cancer. And
Yes.
that was because my mother and I both were diagnosed in the same year. It was in 94, actually, with 2 different types of cancer. And that same year, I had a couple of friends die through HIV-related illnesses. And so that PhD was sort of really simple in a way. I was trying to find a book to read.
Yes.
Although, of course, there was Susan Sontag's Illness as a Metaphor, but I was really inspired by the work of artists and also activists as well. So in the end, I decided to do a PhD and write this book that I wanted to find myself, which, funnily enough, I never got published as a book, but it at least gave me the information that I was seeking. I did publish in some articles. So I guess that's almost love for those people, but also I just always thought, I just thought it was really sad that you could get a virus through making love.
Yes.
Of course, you can also get HIV through blood as well, but fundamentally through sex. It just seems so awful, and especially before the antiretrovirals medication was made available, which made the lives of people, longer, better, healthier, and PrEP and all those sorts of different pharmaceuticals. So I guess there's love. It's maybe I just never sort of expressed it in this way, but that was, one of the reasons why I did all that work. So I guess that's down to love, self-love, self-care, love your mum, love your friends.
Yes. Isolation in the pandemic. I felt this a lot, and perhaps even more afterwards. During the pandemic, I was pretty okay. I missed going out. But but I was I was pretty okay. I think I had a stronger experience afterwards. And this love, I think the way you use it is such a strong word, because the lack of intimacy and social relations that were caused through the pandemic, but you use this and explain this in a broader sense, and what you said before that we already know, racism, precarity, all of this. So intimacy. Go.
I just want to add something, because in terms of reading it myself, I think I'd also I didn't use the word, but I think solidarity works here as well. Love is sort of different, and that gets back to your book, really, and my thinking and how I came to it. But actually, I didn't use the word solidarity, but I think that's what it's about in many respects as well.
I felt like this as well. Let's talk about this, a bit more. I made some notes, before our conversation, and you in your text, you then in the end speak about radical intimacies, and I'd like to let's just talk about it now in that sense. So there's boundaries to love, there's boundaries to intimacy. They are inflicted by, in this case, by perhaps a pandemic, but also by a larger system which is lacking of care or is basically designed to exploit. And this intimate and close social relation that you also pair then with affect, that seems to have in your argument a political power and a political connotation. So it's not just a romantic love, but it is, but it is love that overcomes this division, these boundaries that are somehow imposed on us. And this is where it becomes radicalized, the love,
Yeah, but it also becomes solidarity.
Yeah.
I live in central Victoria now. I lived in inner city north
Yeah.
of Melbourne during the lockdowns, and then
Yeah.
moved to the country. And have discovered, so they had there were different lockdown conditions in people in regional Victoria to Melbourne. And, they were really surprised when I sort of said to them, well, we went through that harsh lockdown so that it wouldn't come to you.
Yeah.
Which I heard lots of people say, and I felt very strongly about that too. I didn't want to see COVID going, it was at the worst in terms of remote Indigenous communities in Australia, but you just didn't want it to go everywhere badly.
Yeah.
So, and people were surprised, and some people were almost, I can't think of the word, not shocked. Well, some were they're surprised, but almost sort of like feeling they didn't sort of quite realize what we were doing and what we were going without to prevent it going much further than the largest city.
Yeah.
I'm getting lost now. Sorry.
The use of intimacy to build social relations, and especially when it's related to love, and the restrictions, this is what we were talking about, the restrictions that are imposed, and you're very explicit about that. And to me, what's really beautiful is the thought of how people can overcome these restrictions. Pretty much at the start of each of your sub chapter in your chapter, right? So when I go to the second one that you titled Viral Love in Viral Times, you start, we ache for the love of others, love that is uncertain, love that is courageous, love that mutates across the pond and pollinates across borders, socially transmitted viral love. So there is again, what you say, we need courageous love. What do you mean with that?
Well, I think during the lockdown times, during the pandemic, we had to sort of we had very simple pleasures in some respects. For a long time, you couldn't go for a walk with someone that wasn't in your household, and it was only limited to 2 and then 3, and then you were allowed to sort of meet in a park if you and all that sort of thing. So it was simple pleasures, and almost I'm not, of course I'm speaking from my experience and what I know within my friendship groups and etc. now.
Yes.
But the delight in seeing someone, like a friend, or I'm sure maybe I wasn't seeing relatives in that experience. You had your lockdown 5-kilometre zone that you had to keep to. But I just think you had this affection and love for people, and awareness of what we were doing so others wouldn't get sick. I mean, of course, there would be other people who were just totally pissed off and maybe didn't give a shit, and who weren't entirely maybe keeping to that. But as a whole, that's what we did during lockdowns. And I guess even though it's been problematized, the sort of coming out of the UK in terms of 8 o'clock in the evenings, and they'd bang, and people would be on their balconies outside their houses sort of banging on pots and everything to thank the NHS staff for caring for them. That has obviously been problematized in terms of, well, they weren't so treated so well and have not been afterwards with their wages, and then they were directly getting COVID in huge proportions, and a whole lot of problems.
Yes.
Within the public health in UK. I'm giving that as a specific example. But there's like that was a demonstration of love on a mass scale.
Yeah.
And then you know there'd be sort of like more intimate, smaller zones of that, like a meeting with a friend for an hour who you've known since you were 20,
Yeah.
and just the excitement of that and the realization of the affection you have, because you're going to make choices in terms of who you're seeing when you're in pandemic times and you have very limited time outside your house that you can actually meet with people, and how many people. So it was intimate, even though you had your social distancing away from each other and all that sort of thing. But aside from the people that you lived with, that was the main sort of intimacy that we were having with others outside the household.
Yeah. I think it's important to remember that. You know,
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, and then there was that sort of like notion of we may, you know, and this is sort of ironic now, really, where the world is so problematic and scary. We had, you know, many of us had this wish that maybe this is time to actually make a better world. Maybe we can do this because of what we're going through. How sad is that? But it's good to remember that wish and desire for that new world.
Absolutely. You know, I still remember when the restrictions were over, and gradually, but then they were over, and then I remember going out and you could walk and you could meet with everyone and you could hug people and you could talk to them and you could have a drink outside, and people were starting to go out, and they were, remember the first musical gig, you know, I went, it was a Melbourne post-punk band named Power Supply that played at Abbotsford Convent in the, you know, in the garden, in the grass. It was a small gig with.
And that would have been great.
Sorry.
That would have been great.
It was amazing, and it was like where, you know, there's this area where the bats are flying when, you know, in the evening over you, like thousands and thousands of bats. And I remember people there, and it was a small crowd, and we were just hugging each other. Everyone was just so happy that we could have a live gig again. You know, it was incredible. And this, I would love to remember this. I would love, when I go to the next gig, I would love to, hey, how great is that we can do that?
Well, live music's pretty special, you know, so, but there is like a collective sort of feeling of we're in this together, we're doing something great, just being here and loving live music. And I remember the first gig I went to as well. I don't know if it must have been after lockdowns, not in between one, but it was actually here in Castlemaine at a pub, the Bridge Hotel. And outside there's a small stage, and I think on Sunday afternoons they still do it. But Romy from RVG played an acoustic set.
Yeah,
it was great. That was my, and you could tell that everyone was just so happy. About being there, and it was my first gig. It might have been a lot of people's first gig as well, but you know, some might have gone to others. I don't know, but I think it was pretty early on.
Yeah. So, you know, like what we're talking, like both of the examples, you know, both of our memories that we just now have shared with each other were really, I think, what you were talking about also when you were said, you know, viral love, like it was that was just spreading there, you know, when we were there at that event, right? You know, this, I mean, you know, there was definitely affection, there was a feeling of love, even, you know, among strangers. And I was of some sort of love, you know, like, and certainly an intimacy and a closeness, and there was a lot of affection. And I was thinking, you know, and asking myself, you know, because this metaphor that you're using, with love, so viral love, but then again, it's even more than a metaphor. And that's something I think very powerful. Powerful in, you use solidarity today, and, so we need that. We need that. And I wonder, what are the conditions for love to become viral? Like something we already detected. So there was a pandemic, right? And, and there were some conditions because of its restrictions. The urge was even larger, right? Even bigger.
Yeah, but I guess it's sort of, I mean, there's different types of love, but like love where you fall in love with someone, or sexual love, it's sort of feels contagious, like you've just been,
it's you, right? It overwhelms you.
Just like a virus does, like you suddenly get it. And COVID, like the first time I had COVID, there wasn't any, I've sort of got a sore throat, and tomorrow I'm just got a bit of sore throat again. Now I've got a bit of this, and then I feel all right. It was just like, I woke up in the middle of the night and I was like, fuck, I'm so sick. It's just like, what is this thing that's just taken over me? So that's a bit like that as well.
You wrote it occupies you. It occupies you. You think about that only, pretty much.
Yeah. Well, look, there's probably lots of pop songs that say it better than me.
Yeah, well, there would be a lot of pop songs.
Sort of if I was more musical, I'd probably be, worth turning into a song, viral love.
Yeah.
It sounds like a viral love now. I'm thinking of tainted love, soft cells, tainted love.
Yeah. I'd like to ask you one thing, because I know that part of your research deals with that as well. And, to make a trajectory, from, let's speak about a pandemic still, but like certain social groups had it very tough. And how can we think about, so your work also deals a lot with homelessness, and then what you also call homefulness, right? So the kind of opposite, the way I understand, right?
Yeah.
How can we think about that? Viral love, homelessness, homefulness.
Well, that's interesting, because I'm working on a book about homefulness at the moment. It's an edited collection, and my colleagues who I'm working on that collection with, we had a meeting the other day about a chapter that I'm leading as a co-author, because we're co-authoring together. And so we were sort of interested in more of the speculative, going towards what homefulness would actually look like, rather than, because we work through manifestos, which are very ranty, lots of demands, and sort of around our specific conditions that we're living in, and that are across the world, etc. So I guess that sort of idea of love is in terms of, you'd have to have some love to be hoping to see more equity, better conditions for other people. You'd have love for other people to want that, or even to advocate or work for that. You wouldn't do it if you didn't have love for other people. So I think, So because if you just sort of liked things, or just didn't really care, you wouldn't bother. So I think there has to be a lot of love with people.
Yeah.
To do things. It might just not be a word that people actually use a lot of the time, in terms of their motivations for doing things. Because if you were sort of question, why are you doing that? It's because I love other people. It might sound really wishy-washy, but it's actually really beautiful. And of course, it's a really fundamental reason why you would do something to make things better, or even more than better, magnificent for people.
If something, we should return to that. We should return to love and take it seriously, and take it very seriously. Think about all its different manifestations, and so that's part of why I really love your chapter, because it opens that discussion and puts love at the center, as something that is in danger to be romanticized or to be seen as you said, just somehow, not serious enough, to be taken seriously, in conversations about such difficult topics. But I think it's essential.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It's interesting, isn't it? Because, I mean, we both work in universities. Could you imagine if you were writing rationale for a project? It's because I love such and such.
yeah, that's right. It wouldn't go that far, right?
No, it wouldn't. But it should be one of the fundamental reasons, particularly if you're working around with people or with non-humans, with animals or
Yeah.
plants, or in response to climate emergency. There has to be some, love for something there.
I'd like to touch on the sensual a bit, which you highlight as well. And like the first thing that I read today about your chapter, was about kissing on someone else on their mouth. And in the times of restrictions, that's restricted, in most of the cases, unless you are living with someone together or you're a couple, but it's difficult to do that to someone you meet for the first time, right?
Well, that's why I chose that text from that poem, because it was pertinent to the COVID experience, given that when we were outside, we were masked.
Yeah.
And, sort of people were nervous about touching, or you were meant to be socially distant.
Yeah.
Physically distant is a better way of obviously explaining it. I'm using that terminology, which I hated, because it wasn't what it actually was about. It was physical distance.
Yeah.
But then, the physical distance in terms of social distancing is really interesting in terms of keeping away from people in that physical way.
Yeah.
Does make it harder to demonstrate your love for them. You can't do it physically. You can only do it through words.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
That's miming, physically, gestures, gesticulating.
Yeah. And that makes certain types of love difficult to manifest, because this physical connection has to happen.
Yeah.
And it's of course different if you're in love with someone for 10 years or if you're in love with someone for 3 days.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's super interesting how such restrictions are then basically, I guess, influencing how we can love, and perhaps then also love mutates, and we learn how to love in a different way because we can't do certain things, right? So we express things differently.
Yeah. Similarly, there was a lot of stigmatization about people with HIV in terms of touching people with HIV, in terms of any physical expression, in terms of having sex with someone with HIV, unprotected sex, etc. For many, many years.
Yeah.
And that, that's something I think it's interesting. I don't know whether that's a good word, but COVID came after the experience of HIV, and then it wasn't so much, it was global. It was in all countries. It was across all groups of people. Yes, there were there were studies very early on into the lockdowns, and then afterwards in terms of communities who were more prevalent to getting COVID because of the social conditions that they were living and working in. But it did go across borders and across class and across, so it was, COVID is bad.
Yeah.
It's not, well, viruses aren't nice, obviously, but it was very obviously facial for a lot of people, but just as well it wasn't Ebola.
Yeah, well,
where,
thankfully.
you know, that where people can die within a couple of days
Yeah, yeah,
of getting the virus.
yeah,
So, and you know, virologists have been were warning from the you know, at least the 90s, because of the work I did around HIV. I was reading a lot about viruses and plagues and this and that, you know, and they were very, very worried. In fact, there was a pandemic committee, I think, that was part of the World Health Organization that just got dismantled. I think it was in the year before
yeah,
COVID eventuated. So we're at our peril when if we don't, you know, if we're not funding research in terms of viruses and not having strategies in terms of how we can prevent, but also live in, you know, in viral conditions if they
yeah,
emerge.
yeah,
And it's alarming that a lot of funding is being cut out of scientific and medical research at the moment, particularly by the US government, in
yes,
case well, for one, we still have COVID, and there's a lot of people with long COVID,
yeah.
and also because there may be other viruses that will emerge, I mean, they will emerge at
Yeah.
some point, you know.
It should be a strong reminder that this can happen. Um, in the scientific community, it definitely is. In the political community, their memory is fairly short. Fairly short.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
um,
absolutely. So maybe they don't have the love for other
yeah,
people, and
they
for the
definitely
people
don't
that they're
to
in
have.
service of,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
like other people who may have that love, and they're spending, you know, sort of years and years doing incredible work in a lab or in a advocacy activist organization,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah. Um, the the physical connection that like if we think of that, it's magic, is so powerful. And then we have these devices, to go back to your arguments. On the one hand there's a condom, on the other hand there's a mask, right? So these two devices, that's the most obvious, the most commonly used in these two cases. It's
Yeah,
fascinating, right? If we look at them as objects, and then
yeah,
they should protect us, but they prevent us also to have this immediate human touch. That
yeah,
is, that is
yeah,
something that we long for, or to
yeah.
use your words, that somehow the viral loves strives towards to. It wants
But
that. You
yeah,
know.
but look, I mean, yes, it's true, but you can have sex with a condom and maybe make more headway than you can probably in kissing with a mask on.
Yeah, that's right.
I didn't try to kiss anyone with a mask on, so I'm not quite sure. I'm just sort of imagining this, but I think, and especially with, you know, the what is it, N95s or whatever they are, those really sturdy ones,
Oh,
that
that's
would
right.
be harder to
Yeah.
kiss with a mask on than just a surgical mask or a cloth mask. The cloth masks that a lot of people were wearing were almost useless.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, the physicality. But PPE, I mean, PPE is much more extensive than the condom and the mask. Good point in
Mm.
regards to HIV and COVID, though. But there's just so much more PPE
Yeah.
that people have had to wear.
I think
Yeah,
with the masks, because they were so much more public, right, and so much more
yeah,
visible.
yeah,
Uh, you were wearing one. We were wearing them in public situations, so they became also this instrument of communication, right? So wearing a mask. I remember how it was. Wearing a mask in a loose manner was kind of one way. Wearing a mask halfway, wearing a mask very tightly, wearing this other mask that you mentioned, which was more serious. Which was a higher grade of protection,
I
or
yeah,
yeah.
I saw you know, like you'd see people drinking coffee or whatever, but I once saw a man and he had a hole in his mask where he had his cigarette. It's a wonder he didn't burn a hole.
Well, Well, that was an urge, definitely. But and then masks became also fashion statements, and they became also, ways of communicating. People had messages, even political messages on the
Yeah.
on
Yeah. Or diamantes.
what?
Diamantes, sort of like fake diamonds.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I guess, well, that's playful, isn't it? That's a way of having to sort of like express yourself, play with something that you
right.
have to wear.
Yeah,
So I mean I bought this beautiful mask for $50 at a friend of mine. It was a costume designer because she wasn't getting any work
yeah,
made. And it was too tight, it was so uncomfortable, couldn't breathe with it. It was just like I don't even know where it is now.
yeah,
And it was beautiful, actually, beautiful material,
yeah,
gorgeous colors, but useless.
yeah. Yeah, I remember a friend gave us, our family, they gave masks with indigenous original patterns, you
Yeah,
know. So we really loved wearing them. So that, that was interesting.
yeah,
Um, Keely, you're right about certain artists, right?
yeah, yeah,
Um, and perhaps if we can talk a bit about them, or what we could learn, about love, uh, intimacy through their
yeah,
work.
yeah,
One artist that you are mentioning is showing, in their work titled Tender,
yeah. Sure.
um,
Yeah,
this social situations which to me were very interesting, because what you used were, there were hands, and there was this exchange of coins
yeah, yeah,
basically in a transaction, right?
yeah,
So what's interesting to me here is that by definition, such a transaction is not existing to bring people together, right? So, I buy something, I buy a commodity, and
yeah,
have this interaction, and the moment I pay, the contract's done, and that's it.
yeah,
I go, I have my thing, they stay there, and there's nothing really that binds us.
yeah,
But you are opening now this space in between, that in this transaction, which uh, which is a loaded thing, especially in capitalism, the act of exchange when we pay for something.
yeah,
There is this space where, and the space is opened up by us using physical objects, namely coins, rather
yeah,
than a credit card.
yeah,
Uh, and in this artwork, is shown, in the exchange of coins from hand to hand, there's a slight touch.
yeah, yeah. Yes, that was interesting project by Jill McGood, and that was presented, or maybe that's not the right word, in 2020 and commissioned by Creative Time. But they commissioned that before the pandemic
Yeah,
started, but it was just amazing timing, because of what was explored. And you're right, sort of like the touch of hands, sort of give money, give coins, and actually during the lockdowns, we saw, people actively asking for the use of cards rather than money that would then exchange hands because they didn't want to touch your hands.
yeah,
So we sort of started moving to a cashless economy
that's right.
that
Yeah,
time. So
yeah,
here's this project, which was the antithesis of this, where there was 120,000 copper pennies circulated in New York
yeah,
as part of the project. And the text on the penny was, "The body was already so fragile." And
yeah,
the timing, I just think it's amazing because, look, when I first saw this project,
yeah,
I wasn't in New York, but learned about it. I thought it really resonated of the times that we were in about COVID, but it was actually commissioned when COVID actually wasn't even circulating itself. But at the same time, it was presented and circulated in COVID times.
yeah,
So, but it spoke a lot about what we were moving to in terms of this fear of having that intimate touch with strangers.
Yes.
So, and that's sort of interesting because we're always touching strangers um, accidentally.
Yeah.
Some people might be doing it deliberately, and I won't even go to that. But we
Yeah.
do have these physical connections with others all the time.
Yes.
And we were very conscious of that when COVID emerged. And so this, this even just sort of acts, people not wanting your money.
Yeah.
Because there was obviously, in terms of when COVID first emerged, that I remember hearing about people cleaning all their groceries because they were scared of getting COVID from their grocery packages, and what the understanding of it being airborne virus was, we didn't have that, although there was many of us probably suspected it. So yeah, we were worried about the virus being on everything, and
That's right.
being, and
Yeah.
then like giving it, like getting it from sort of like someone's $10 note,
That's right. Yeah.
dollar coin or whatever. So
Yeah.
yeah, this work is actually really interesting, I think. And just the luck of it, or the premonition or something. But I mean, obviously is very much a statement about the times that we were living in anyhow. So I guess in some respects, could you say that you're going to get the viruses you deserve? Maybe that's harsh, maybe not. I don't know. I don't want to think about that too much. And then, because I'm instantly jumping back in time in my mind, thinking of the influenza pandemic
Yeah.
and the horror of that. That's another horrible one. It was lucky that COVID wasn't like the influenza pandemic, because people would get it and drop dead in the street.
That's right. Yeah. 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 If
So
we that we were well off. Um, I it's ironic, isn't it, that the use of cashless payments
yeah,
was suggested as a protection, right? On a society level, like personal protection, right? Like you
yeah,
protect yourself, you protect other people, and there's a social scale for that. But then this cashless payments, to go back, that there is a direct connection with how pandemics, viruses, the whole, health in general is being governed by capital.
yeah,
We have then, and to go back to homelessness, where it's hard to give a homeless person money because you don't have money. So you have to go to a cash
yeah,
machine, get money,
yeah,
and walk back to do
yeah,
that, because you're using credit cards for which you pay so much money for each transaction, without even knowing, because it's hidden.
yeah, yeah,
But the pandemic, it was used. It's ironic, right? It's ironic. While at the same time, the artwork that you're highlighting is about, this human touch. If we are still using cash, coins,
yeah,
uh, which is counter that alienation,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
That is actually caused by capital and
yeah,
capital. So
yeah.
it opens really beautiful nuances, I think. What you.
Well, that's right. And that's also because there's certain types of economies which need cash.
Yeah.
Um, Otherwise, they're not going to exist so easily.
Yeah.
And a lot of smaller markets, not Victoria market or whatever, but um, oh, and saying that, I haven't been to a large market in a long time, so I can't even say whether everyone's got, whether people are not dealing with cash in just like a greengrocer stall in a market like the Victoria market in Melbourne.
Yeah.
But I'm also thinking of smaller markets, farmers markets, just local markets, garage sales. There's a whole, I had a friend and we used to make the joke. I know this is not going to sound very good, but we were trying to sort of like work out. So, how does this really small time drug dealer sell their drugs in a cashless economy. We weren't thinking of big time drug dealers, but it was a sort of running stupid little joke that we had every now and then during lockdown.
How are they doing that? They still
I
probably
don't know.
they would require money, of course they would.
Yeah. So how do
it-
you? Yeah, exactly. So if we completely move to a cashless economy, I also thought in a cashless economy, I couldn't get my head around, well, what happens with little kids? Like you give them a little bit of pocket money and then they might buy it on lollies or something or whatever, like very young children. I'm thinking, what do you give them their own credit card at 5 so they can go? I don't know. Parents obviously have that figured out. I don't have, like, I've got a almost 27-year-old son, so I haven't had to worry about that. But the cashless economy for many countries was already there before COVID anyhow, but obviously would have become more widespread because of that. And I mean, I guess that's a certain sort of economy, an accelerated capitalist economy in particular. Where the means of banking through and the way that transactions can take place are quite automated and easy.
That's right. Yeah. I think that if the pandemic somehow amplified certain desires and needs and longings, right, and urge and the power of love and touch and affect and senses. I think how can this lesson be amplified? How can we keep remembering the pandemic, since we both agree that the idea of viral love is something we need, and although the pandemic is not, well, the COVID is certainly here, right? This is this is what is clear, but the situation is different. So the same level of amplification isn't happening, right? Because it's so normal and it's so accessible somehow. So it loses its, in a way, to me at least, this subversive potential, unless we remind ourselves of its existence and do something with it.
Well, also before COVID emerged, there was a real interest and emphasis on slow food, slow fashion, slow this, slow that. And we were slow for a long time. For 2 years, we were slow. Then it just went all fast again. And people got absorbed in the fast.
Yeah.
So maybe sort of like another sort of movement around slowing down. And not just like overworking, overeating, over-consuming, over-extracting, and all those over-indulgence things. Maybe that's also could be really important. I think that, the world has shifted quite dramatically in the last few years. There's resonances of things that have happened in the past, of course, but we are at a different situation than we were at the start of or during the pandemic, or even just coming out of the pandemic. I think in terms of the sort of like political situation and personal situation of a lot of people, obviously, as well. But it could be our peril if we don't slow down. Well, it will be. We're in a climate emergency. An overarching climate emergency that affects everyone everywhere. So that in thinking about that, love is for love of the planet and love of everything on the planet.
That's right. Everything that is alive.
Yeah, and obviously coronaviruses was seen to also be a problem in terms of, like where did it come from is a question that is still even being raised now, used politically. But most likely it was through, an animal trend, sort of like infecting human being, which is where a lot of viruses come from.
That's right.
Including HIV, came from monkeys.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's right. That's
yeah.
right.
So, but and obviously in an over-farmed world, in where cities are verging on habitats, well, we're all across habitats that isn't natural to be built up like this. But the cities are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and so all of that is contributed to viruses and the proliferation of viruses. So slowing down. Yeah, slow down, I think, does need to happen because we're over extracting and overdoing things and thinking more about the simple pleasures. So, which is something going back to the time of lockdown. I just think there were so many learnings. I would never have moved to the country if I hadn't have gone through the lockdowns. And I learned a lot during the lockdowns, and I am very aware that I was getting a regular salary and was safe. So I acknowledge that that's very different to a lot of people.
Of course.
But there are just elements of it I'm glad that I lived through because I learned so much about myself and others.
Yeah.
During that time.
Yeah. I feel the same. And maybe, for kind of a bit of a, concluding thoughts, like one of we were talking about broad topics and then, like climate change, for example. But mostly we were talking about tender things, little things, the need to touch some, when I say small things, they're not small, of course, they're big. That's the point. But you said it as well, to cherish, to value the smaller things.
Yeah.
And I think that is, to me, the lesson of your idea of viral love in this context.
Yeah.
This is what was prohibited, this is what was impossible, and this is what we were longing for. And this is, then this is something we could learn, that big things, are in this, what seem to be smaller everyday things.
Yeah.
And that's what's beautiful, that we have and we can have.
Yeah.
And we should really consider that and think about that and focus on that. And in that sense, this, the intimacy perhaps becomes radical if we, and political, definitely, if we understand and feel how valuable and beautiful and important these seemingly small things are in relationships and in relation to the world.
I agree, and I'm glad that we're having this conversation, Oliver, because I think that there's a lot of people who just do not want to think about or converse about COVID, to acknowledge that it's still going, that we still have it. There's almost like this ban on thinking about COVID. In fact, we were post-COVID a couple of months into COVID, which was sort of crazy because we're still not post-COVID. We might be post-lockdown. So I think it's really important because obviously the virus is still circulating and affecting people and people getting sick, and the main ramifications are not necessarily people dying, but people getting long COVID. But yes, in a highly fraught world, it is really important to reflect on some of the many magnificent and beautiful and loving things that we expressed and went through. Those of us who were fortunate enough to experience that, to not lose sight of that, because
absolutely,
there's many lessons and good ways of living with that. Of course, we want it more relational and not, at the same time, but important to think about, especially if times become more difficult, that mutual aid and love of people that was something so prevalent in a lot of communities during the pandemic, and I'm speaking of lockdown years in particular. is something that needs to be mustered a lot of the time, and that might be because of flooding in a part of Australia that you're in, or thinking what you can do if refugees are detained.
That's right.
Somewhere in your community.
Yes.
Or if people get sick.
Yes.
With whatever it is, including COVID. So I think there's definitely a lot of really fantastic things that we can learn from and remember and still take from and still work with and enjoy.
Yeah. Thank you, Keely.
That's okay.
I enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Thank you for listening. This podcast is a production of Memefest and Intellect, publisher of Original Thinking. It is a celebration of our collaboration and Intellect's 40th anniversary. The podcast is produced in Naarm, also known by its colonial name Melbourne. We would like to pay our respects to elders, past, present and emerging. Sovereignty was never ceded. The music at the start and end of each episode is by the band Bait from Boona in Victoria, with members Michael McGuinness and Malachi Doyle. You can find them on Bandcamp. Check them out. Thanks. Until our next episode, take care.